of always. The thief of always, hopefully the end. Here we go. We are on chapter 23, the War of the Seasons, and he was headed towards the lake, and then he had this brilliant idea to wear down the house by asking for too many things. And the house, he just asked it to make all 4 seasons at once, winter, spring, summer, and fall, to try to wear the house out. So here we go. Hood didn't waste any time. He'd no sooner made his final offer to Harvey. So Harvey said he would join him and stay there forever if Hood could do this. Then the balmy wind grew gusty, carrying off the lamb's wool clouds that had been drifting through the summer sky. In their place came a juggernaut, a thunderhead, the size of a mountain, which loomed over the house like a shadow thrown against heaven. It had more than lightning at its dark heart. It had the light rains that came at early morning to coax forth the seeds of another spring. It had the drooping fogs of autumn and the spiraling snows that had brought so many midnight Christmases to the house. Now all 3 fell at once, rain, snow, and fog, as a chilly sleet that all but covered the sun. It would have killed the flowers on the slope with cold had the wind not reached them first, tearing through the blossoms with such vehemence that every petal and leaf was snatched up into the air. Standing between this fragrant tide and the plummeting curtain of ice and cloud, Harvey was barely able to stay upright. But he planted his feet wide apart and resisted every blast, determined not to take shelter. This spectacle might be the last he set eyes upon as a free spirit if it didn't work. He intended to enjoy it. It was a sight to behold, a battle the likes of which the planet has never seen. To his left, shafts of sunlight pierced the storm clouds in the name of summer, only to be smothered by autumn's fogs, while to his right, spring coaxed out the buds of spring and the spring blossoms that were just about to be murdered by winter frost before they could show their colors. Attack after attack was mounted and repulsed. Reveille and retreat sounded 100 times, but no season was able to carry the day. It was soon impossible to distinguish spring from fall, from summer from winter. Snow melted the rain as it fell. Rain was boiled into vapor by the heat and sweated out through the new shoots as they rotted. And somewhere in the midst of all the chaos, the power that had brought it all raised its voice in a rage, demanding that it cease. Enough, the Hood house yelled, enough! But its voice, which had once carried such terrible authority, had grown weak, and its orders went unnoticed, or if noticed, then disobeyed. The seasons raged on, throwing themselves against each other with rare abandon, and in passing, tearing at the house which stood in the midst of their battlefield. The walls, which had begun to teeter as Hood's power diminished, were thrown over by the raging wind. The chimneys were racked by thunder. Lightning rods struck so many times they melted. The slate roof was burning, setting fire to every floorboard, banister, and stick of furniture it touched. The porch was plummeted by hail. The staircase rocked by the growth of dirt around it and plants growing up through the base. Squinting against the face of the storm, Harvey witnessed all of this and rejoiced. He'd come to the house hoping to steal back the years that Hood had tricked from him, but he'd never dared believe he could bring the whole house down. Yet here it was, falling as he watched. Loud though the wind and thunder were, they couldn't drown out the sound of the house as it perished and went to dust. Every nail and sill and brick seemed to shriek at once, and only then was Harvey able to glimpse Hood's last moments. A cloud of dirt rose like a veil to cover the sight, but he knew the moment of his battle was over, because the seasons suddenly turned to peace. The thunder had softened, the wind dropped, the fierce sun grew watery and veiled in mist. There was debris in the air, of course, petals and leaves and dust and ash. They fell like a dream rain though their fall marked the end of a dream. "Oh, child," said Mrs. Griffin. Harvey turned to her. She was standing just a few yards from him, gazing up at the sky. There was a little patch of blue above their heads, the first glimpse of real sky that these grounds had seen since Mr. Hood had founded his empire of illusions. But it was not the patch she was watching. It was a congregation of floating lights, the same that Harvey had seen Hood feeding upon in the attic, which had been freed by the collapse of the house. They were now moving in a steady stream toward the lake. The children's souls, she said, her voice growing thinner as she spoke the word. Beautiful. Her body was no longer solid, Harvey saw. She was fading away in front of him. Oh, no, he murmured. She took her eyes off the sky and stared down at her arms and the cat she was carrying, too. It, too, was growing invisible. Look at us, Mrs. Griffin said with a smile upon her tired face. It feels so wonderful. But you're disappearing. I've lingered here far too long, sweet boy, she said. There were tears glistening on her face, but they were tears of joy. It's time to go, she said. You are the brightest soul I ever met, Harvey Swick, she said. Keep shining, won't you? Harvey wished he had some words to persuade her to stay a little while longer. But even if he'd had such words, he knew it would have been selfish to speak them. Mrs. Griffin had another life to go to, where every soul shone. Goodbye, child, she said. Wherever I go, I will speak of you with love. Then she flickered out, leaving Harvey alone in the ruins. And here, chapter 24, you have this picture. Ooh, creepy. It says a fledgling thief. A fledgling is like a baby bird. He was not alone for long. Mrs. Griffin and Stewcat had no sooner vanished from sight than Harvey heard a voice calling his name. The air was still thick with dust, and he had to look hard for the speaker, but after a little time he found her, stumbling toward him. Lulu? Who else? She said with a little laugh. The lake's dark water was still soaked from head to foot, but it ran from her body and into the ground. The last traces of silver scales went with it. When she opened her arms to him, they were human arms. You're free, he said. I can't believe you're free. We're all free, she said, and glanced back toward the lake, and an extraordinary sight met his eyes, a procession of laughing children coming toward him through the mist. Those closest to him were all but returned to their human shape. Those behind them still shaking off their fishiness step by step, although, you know what I'm wondering? You know how the attic was full of all their old clothes? Are they naked? Is it a bunch of naked children? Ah! We should all get out of here, Harvey said, looking toward the wall. I don't think we'll have any trouble getting through the mist now. One of the children behind Lulu had spotted a box of clothes in the rubble of the house, and announcing his find to the rest, they stumbled through the debris to find something to wear. Lulu left Harvey's side to join the search, but not before she'd planted a kiss on his cheek. Don't expect one from me, said Wendell as he stepped into view. What did you do, Harvey? He wanted to know. Pull the place down brick by brick? Something like that, Harvey said, unable to conceal his pride. There was a roaring sound from the direction of the lake. What's that? Harvey wanted to know. The water's disappearing, Wendell said. Where to? Wendell shrugged. Who cares, he said. Eager to witness this, Harvey walked toward the lake and through the clouds of dirt in the air saw that it was indeed becoming a whirlpool. What happened to Hood, by the way? Wendell wanted to know. He's gone, said Harvey, almost mesmerized by the sight of the vortex. They've all gone. Even as the words left his lips, a voice said, not quite. He turned from the water, and there in the rubble stood Rictus. His fine jacket was torn, his face white with dust. He looked like a clown, a laughing clown. Now, why would I take myself off? He asked. We never said goodbye. Harvey stared at him with bafflement on his face. Hood was gone, so was his magic. How could Rictus have survived the disappearance of his master? I know what you're thinking, said Rictus, reaching into his pocket. You're wondering why I'm not dead and gone. Well, I'll tell you, I did some planning ahead. He drew a glass globe which flickered as though it held a dozen candle flames out of his pocket. I stole a little piece of the old man's magic just in case he ever got tired of me and tried to put me out of my misery. He lifted the globe up. I've got enough power here to keep me going for years and years, he said, long enough to build a new house and take over where Hood left off. Oh, don't look so unhappy, kid. I got a place for you right here. He slapped his thigh. You can be my bird dog. I'll send you out looking for kitty winkies to bring home to Uncle Rictus. He slapped his thigh a second time. Come on, he said. Don't waste any time now. I don't. He stopped there, his gaze dropping to the rubble at his feet. A terrified whisper escaped his throat. Oh, no, he murmured. I beg. Before he could finish a plea, a hand with foot-long nails reached up from the rubble and snatched hold of his throat, dragging him down into the dirt in one swift motion. Mine, said a voice off the ground, mine. It was Hood, Harvey knew. There was no other voice on earth that cut so deep. Rictus struggled in his creator's grip, digging in the debris for some weapon, but none came. All he had was his skill as a persuader. The magic's yours, he said. I was holding on to it for you. Liar, said a voice that rose from the debris. I swear. Give it to me then, Hood demanded. Where shall I put it? Rictus asked, his voice a strangled croak. Hood's hand loosened a little. He managed to haul himself to his knees. Right here, Hood said, hanging on Rictus' collar by the littlest digit. Pour it in the ground. The ground? Into the ground. Rictus pressed the globe between his palms and it shattered, its bright contents running out and into the ground in front of him. There was a moment of silence, then a tremor ran through his fingers. Hood's fingers let its captive slip, and Rictus hurriedly got to his feet. He had no chance to escape, though. Pieces of timber and stone instantly moved over the heaps of rubble toward the spot where he'd poured the magic. Several lifted high into the air. All Rictus could do was cover his head as the hail increased. Harvey was clear of this frying debris and might well have made a retreat, but he was wiser than that. If he fled now, he knew his business with Hood would never be finished. It would be like a nightmare he could never quite shake. Whatever happened next, however terrible, it would be better to see it and understand it than turn his back and have it haunt him to his dying day. He didn't have to wait long for Hood's next move. The hand holding Rictus' neck suddenly let him go, and in a flash was gone from sight. The following moment, the ground gaped and a form appeared, hunched over as it climbed out of its tomb in the rubble. Rictus let out a cry of horror, but it was short. Before he could retreat, the figure reached for him and, turning to face Harvey, held his traitorous servant high. Here at last was the evil that had built Holiday House, shaped more or less like a man. He was not made of flesh or blood, however. He used the magic Rictus had unwillingly provided to create another body. In the high times of evil, Hood had been a house. Now it was the other way around. The house, what was left of it, had become Mr. Hood. And here it says, the vortex. So there's Hood. He's pretty crazy looking. Chapter 25, the vortex. Amadi, did you have a question?
On the source of studies.
Yep. Here we go. So thief, he said, ignoring Rictus's pitiful struggles. You see me as the man I was, or rather as a copy of that man. Is it what you expected? Yes, Harvey said, it's exactly what I expected. Oh, you're dirt and muck and bits and pieces, Harvey said. You're nothing. Nothing am I, said Hood. Ha, I'll show you, thief. I'll show you what I am. Let me kill him for you, Rictus managed to gasp. You needn't bother. I'll do it. You brought him here, Hood said, turning his splintered eyes on the servant. You're to blame. He's just a boy. I can deal with him. Just let me do it, Rictus said. Let me. But before he could finish, Hood took hold of his servant's head and with one short motion simply twisted it off. A yellowish cloud of foul-smelling air rose from the severed neck, and Rictus, the last of Hood's abominable quartet, perished in an instant. Hood let the head go from his hand. It flew up into the air like an unknotted balloon, giving off a farting sound as it looped the loop and finally fell empty on the ground. Hood casually dropped the body, which had shrunk into nothing, and turned his mirrored gaze back upon Harvey. Now, thief, you will see my power. His mane of splinters stood on end as though every one of them was ready to pierce Harvey's heart. His mouth grew wide as a tunnel, and a blast of sour, icy air rose from his belly. Come closer, he roared, opening his arms. The rags that clung there billowed and spread like the wings of some ancient vampire, a vampire that had dined on the blood of a pterodactyl. Come, he said again, or must I come for you? Harvey didn't waste his breath with a reply. He'd need every gasp he had if he was to outpace this horror. Not even certain what direction he was taking, he turned on his heels and ran as another blast of soul-freezing air struck him. The ground was treacherous, covered with rubble. He fell in 6 strides and glanced to see Hood descending upon him with a vengeful streak. He hauled himself to his feet, Hood's rusted nails missing him by a whistling inch, and had taken 3 more strides when he heard Lulu calling his name. He veered in the direction of her voice, but Hood caught the collar of his jacket. Got you, little thief, he roared, dragging Harvey back into his splintery embrace. Before Hood could catch better hold, however, Harvey threw back his arms, pitched himself forward, and off came the jacket. He made another dash for freedom, his eyes fixed on Lulu, who was beckoning him toward her. She was standing on the edge of the lake, he realized, perched inches from the spinning water. Surely he didn't imagine they could escape into the lake. The vortex will tear them limb from limb. We can't, he yelled to Lulu. We must, she called back. It's the only way. He was within 3 strides now. He could see her bare feet, slithering and sliding on the slimy rocks as she fought to keep her balance. He reached out for her, but her eyes were not on him. They were on the monster at his back. Lulu, he yelled to her, don't look. But her gaze was fixed upon Hood, her mouth open, and Harvey couldn't help but glance back to see what she saw. Hood's pursuit had thrown his coat of rags into disarray, and there was something between its folds she saw, darker than any night sky. What was it? The essence of his magic, perhaps, guarding his loveless heart? Do you give up? Hood said, driving Harvey back onto the rocks beside Lulu. Surely you must not choose the vortex over me. Go, Harvey murmured to Lulu, his gaze still fixed on the mystery beneath Hood's coat. He felt her hand grasp his for a moment. It's the only way, she said. Then her fingers were gone and he was standing on the rocks alone. If you choose the flood, you will die horribly, Hood was saying. It will spin you apart, whereas I offer you an easy death, rocked to sleep on a bed of illusions. Choose, he said. Out of the corner of his eye, Harvey glimpsed Lulu. She had not fled, as he'd thought. She'd simply gone to find a weapon, and she had one, a piece of timber dragged out of the rubble. It would be precious little use against Hood's enormity, Harvey knew, but he was glad not to be alone in these last moments. He looked up at Hood's face. Maybe I should sleep, he said. The Vampire King smiled. Wise little thief, he replied, opening his arms to invite the boy into his shadow. Harvey took a step over the rock toward Hood, raising his hand as he did so. His face was reflected in the shattered mirrors of the vampire's eyes, 2 thieves in one head. Sleep, said Hood, but Harvey had no intention of sleeping yet. Before Hood could stop him, he grabbed hold of the coat and pulled. The scraps came away with a wet tearing sound, and Hood let out a howl of rage as he was uncovered. There was no great enchantment at his heart. In fact, there was no heart at all. There was only a void, neither cold nor hot, living nor dead, made not of mystery, but of nothingness. The illusionist's illusion. Furious at this revelation, Hood let out another roar of rage and reached down to reclaim the rags of his coat from the thief's hand. Harvey took a quick step backward, however, avoiding the fingers by an inch. Hood came raging after him, his soul squeaking on the rock, leaving Harvey with no choice but to retreat another step until he had nowhere to go but the flood. Again, Hood snatched at him and would have caught him if Lulu had not run at him from behind, swinging the timber like a baseball bat. She struck the back of Hood's knee so hard her weapon shattered. The impact knocked her to the ground. The blow was not without effect, however. It threw Hood off balance, and flailing wildly, the thunder of the vortex shaking the rock on which he and Harvey perched and threatening to toss them both into the maelstrom or vortex. Even now, Hood was determined to claim his rags back. Give me my coat, thief, he yelled. It's all yours, Harvey yelled, and tossed the rag toward the water. Hood lunged after them, and as he did so, Harvey flung himself back toward solid ground. He heard Hood shriek behind him and turned to see the Vampire King, the rags in his fist, pitch headfirst into the frenzied water. The maned head surfaced for a moment, and Hood struck out for the bank, but strong as he was, the vortex was stronger. It swept him away from the rocks, drew it toward its center, where the water spiraled him down into the earth. In terror, he screamed for help, his pitiful screaming only able to be heard when the whirlpool carried him to a bank where Harvey and Lulu now stood. Thief, he yelled, help me, and I'll give you the world forever. Then the water began to rip at his body, tearing him apart. On shore, Harvey put his arm around Lulu, laughing and sobbing at the same time. We did it, he said. Did what? Said a voice at their backs, and they looked around to see Wendell wandering toward them, ignorant as ever. Every article of clothing he'd found in the rubble was either too large or too small. What's been going on? He wanted to know. What are you laughing at? What are you crying for? He looked beyond Harvey and Lulu in time to see the last of Hood disappear with a fading howl. And what was that? He demanded. Harvey wiped the tears from his cheeks and got to his feet. At last, he had a purpose for Wendell's reply. Who cares, he said. And we're to the very end. Living proof. Chapter 26. The wall of mist still hovered at the edge of Hood's domain. I wonder if he got his years back. We still don't really know. And it was there that the survivors gathered to say their farewells. None quite knew what adventures lay on the other side of the mist, of course. Each of the children had come into the house from a different year. Would they all find that age, give or take a month or two, awaiting them on the other side? Even if we don't get the stolen years back, Lulu said as they prepared to step into the mist, we're free because of you, Harvey. There were murmurs of thanks from the little crowd and a few grateful tears. Say something, Wendell hissed to Harvey. Why? Because you're a hero. I don't feel like one. So tell them that. Harvey raised his hands to hush the murmurs. I just want to say that we'll probably all forget about being here in a little while. A few of the children said, no, we won't, or we'll always remember. But Harvey insisted. We will, he said. We'll grow up and we'll forget unless what? Asked Lulu. Unless we remind ourselves every morning or make a story of it and tell everyone we meet. They won't believe us, said one of the children. Doesn't matter, said Harvey. We'll know it's true and that's what counts. This met with approval from all sides. Now let's go home, said Harvey. We've wasted too much time here already. Wendell nudged him in the ribs as the group dispersed. What about telling them you're not a hero? Oh yeah, said Harvey with a mischievous smile. I forgot about that. The first of the children were already going through the mist, eager to put the horrors of Hood's prison behind them as soon as possible. Harvey watched them disappear, wishing he had a moment more to talk to them and find out who they were and how they fell into the house's grip. Had they been orphans? Or like Wendell and Lulu, simply bored with their lives the way he'd been bored and seduced by the illusions? He'd never know. They were disappearing one by one until there was only Lulu, Wendell, and himself outside the wall. Well, Wendell said to Harvey, if time really is set to right out there, then I'm going back a few more years than you. That's true. If we meet again, I'm going to be a lot older. You may not even know me. I'll know you, Harvey said. Promise, said Wendell. I promise. And with that, they shook hands and Wendell made his departure. He was gone in 3 steps. Lulu sighed. Have you ever wanted 2 things at the same time, she asked Harvey, but you knew you couldn't have both of them? Once or twice, said Harvey. Why? Because I'd like to grow up with you and be your friend, she replied. But I also want to go home. And I think in the year that's waiting for me on the other side of the wall, you haven't even been born. Harvey nodded sadly, glancing back toward the ruins. I guess we do have one thing to thank Hood for. What's that? We were children together, he said, taking hold of her hand, at least for a little while. Lulu tried to smile, but her eyes were full of tears. Let's go together as far as we can, Harvey said. Yes, I'd like that, Lulu replied, and hand in hand they walked toward the wall. At the last moment, before the mist enveloped them, they looked around at each other and Harvey said home, and they stepped into the wall. For the first step, he felt Lulu's hand in his, but by the second, it had grown faint. And by the third, when he stepped on the street, it was gone. And he was delivered back into the time from which he'd stepped all those seasons ago. Harvey looked up at the sky. The sun had set, but its pinkish light still found the ribs of cloud laid high above him. The wind was gusty and chilled the sweat of fear and exertion in his face and spine. Teeth chattering, he started home through the darkening streets, uncertain what awaited him. It was strange that after so many victories, the simple business of walking home should defeat him, but defeat him it did. After an hour of wandering, his wits and strength, which had preserved him from every terror Hood could conjure, failed him. His head began to spin, his legs buckled, and he fell down on the sidewalk exhausted. Luckily, 2 passerbys took pity on him and asked him where he lived. It was dangerous, he recalled, to trust his life to strangers, but he had no choice. He woke in the darkness, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought the Black Lake had claimed him after all, and he was down in its depths. Crying out in terror, he sat up. But to his infinite relief, he saw the window at the bottom of his bed. The curtain slightly parted and heard the patter of rain on the sill. He was home. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up. His whole body ached as though he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer, but he was strong enough to get to the door and open it. The sound of 2 familiar voices drifted up from the bottom of the stairs. I'm just happy he's home, he heard his mom say. So am I, said his dad, but we need some explanations. We'll get them, his mom went on, but we shouldn't push him too far. Clinging to the banisters as he went, Harvey started down the stairs while Mom and Dad continued to talk. We need to find out the truth quickly, his father said. I mean, suppose he was involved with something criminal. Not Harvey. Yes, Harvey, you saw the state of him. Blood and dirt all over him. He's not been out picking roses, that's for sure. At the bottom of the stairs, Harvey halted, a little afraid to face the truth. Had anything changed, or were the two people just out of sight, still old and frail? He went to the door and pushed it open. His mom and dad were standing with their backs to him, staring out at the rain. "Hello," he said. They both turned at the same moment, and Harvey let out a whoop of joy to see that all the grief and horror of the house had not been endured in vain. Here was his prize, staring down at him. His mother and father looking just the way they had before Rictus had come. The stolen years were back where they belonged, in his possession. "I'm a good thief," he said, half to himself. "Oh, my darling," said his mom, coming to him with open arms. He hugged her first, then his dad. "What have you been up to, son?" his dad wanted to know. Harvey remembered how difficult it had been to explain everything last time. So instead of even trying, he said, "I was just wandering around and got lost. I didn't mean to upset you. You said something about a thief." "Did I?" "You know you did," his dad said sternly. "Well, are you a thief if you're taking something that belonged to you in the first place?" Harvey asked him. His dad and mom exchanged puzzled looks. "No, honey," his mom said, "of course not." "Then I'm not a thief," Harvey replied. "I think you owe both of us the truth, Harvey," his mom said. "We want to know everything." "Everything?" "Everything," said his dad. So he told him the whole tale, just as they'd asked right from the beginning. If they had been doubtful the last time he'd related it, they were incredulous now. "Do you really expect us to believe all this?" his father broke in. "I can take you to the house," Harvey said, "or what's left of it. I couldn't find it last time because it hid itself, but Hood's gone, so there's no magic left to hide with it." Once again, his mom and dad exchanged looks. "If we can find this Hood house," his father said, "we'd both like to see it." They set out early the next day, and this time, just as Harvey expected, the way back was not concealed. He found the streets easily and soon came to the slope on which the house had once stood. "That's it," he said. The house stood there. "It's just a hill, Harvey," his dad said, "a hill covered in grass." It was indeed a surprise to see the ground, which had looked so terrible the day before, completely green and clean. "It all looks rather pretty," his mother said. "The ruins are under there, I swear," Harvey said. "I'll show you. Come on." They weren't the only visitors today. There were several kite flyers playing in the wind at the top of the ridge, a dozen dogs, children laughing. Harvey resented the presence of all these people. How dare they play here just as if this were just another hill? He wanted to tell them that they were converting on the ruins of a terrible site. But then he thought perhaps it was better this way, that the hill not be haunted by rumors and stories. The name of Hood would probably never cross the lips of these people, and why should it? His evil had no place in happy hearts. "Well," said Harvey's dad, "this house of yours is well buried." Harvey went down on his haunches and dug at the ground. The ground was soft and gave off a sweet smell. "Strange, isn't it?" said a voice. He looked up from his labors, both his fists full of dirt. A man a little older than his father was standing a few yards from him. "Who do you think it is?" "It's got to be Wendell, right?" "What are you talking about?" Harvey asked. "The flowers, the ground," he said. "I mean, maybe the earth has its own magic, good magic, I mean, and it's buried Hood's memory forever." "You know about Hood?" Harvey said. The man nodded. "What exactly do you know?" Harvey's mom asked. "Our son's been telling us such strange stories." "They're all true," the man said. "You haven't even heard them," Harvey's dad replied. "You should trust your boy," the man said. "I have it on the best authority that he's a hero." Harvey's dad stared at his son with a twitch of a smile on his face. "Really? Were you one of Hood's prisoners?" "Not me," the man said. "Then how do you know?" The man glanced over his shoulder, and there at the bottom of the slope stood a woman in a white dress. Harvey studied this stranger, trying to make out her face, but her wide-brimmed hat kept her features in the shadows. He started to get to his feet, intending to take a closer look. But the man said, "Don't, please. She sent me in her place just to say hello. She remembers you the way you are, young that is, and she'd like you to remember her the same way." "Lulu," Harvey murmured. The man neither confirmed nor denied this. He simply said to Harvey, "I'm very thankful to you, young man. I hope to be as fine a husband to her as you were a friend." "Husband," Harvey mouthed. "How time flies," the man said, consulting his watch. "We're late for lunch. May I shake your hand, young sir?" "It's dirty," Harvey warned, letting the earth run between his fingers. "It could be better between us," the man replied with a smile. "Than this, oh, what could be better between us," the man replied with a smile, "than this healing earth?" He took Harvey's hand, shook it, and with a nod to Harvey's mom and dad, hurried back down the slope. "Ooh, we're almost done." Harvey watched as he spoke to the woman in the white dress, saw her nod, saw her smile. Then they were both gone. "Well," said Harvey's dad, "it seems your Mr. Hood existed after all." So you believe me? Something happened here and you were a hero. I believe that. Then that's enough, said Harvey's mom. We don't have to keep digging, sweetie. Whatever's under there should stay buried. Harvey was about to empty his left hand of dirt when his dad said, let me have that, and opened his hand. Really, said Harvey. I've heard a little good magic's always useful, came his father's reply. Isn't that right? Harvey smiled. Always. The days that followed were unlike any Harvey had ever known. There was no more talk of Hood or the house or the Green Hill. He knew that he had only the vaguest sense of what had happened to them, but they all three agreed on one thing. It was fine to be together again. Time would be precious from now on. It would tick by, of course, as it always had, but Harvey was determined he wouldn't waste it with sighs and complaints. He'd fill every moment with the seasons he'd found in his heart. Hopes like birds on the spring branch, happiness like a warm summer sun, magic like the rising mist of autumn, and best of all, love. Love enough for 1,000 Christmases. And that is the end of our book. And that is my hope for you this summer. Enjoy every second, every moment. Fill it with creativity and joy and love and family, and just make the best of it. All right, my friends, I will see some of you at the zoo. The rest of you can zoom into specials. And I'll see you all on Wednesday morning. Have a wonderful weekend.